Hey, Motorman here. If you're not familiar with this channel, you just wandered here by accident. I'm a motor officer instructor. I'm the maker of the Ride Like a Pro video. And I also have 21 schools around the country, including my own here in Newport Richey, Florida. And I am at Newport Richey Harley Davidson. And I'm about to do something I haven't done. I've done a lot of reviews, but I've never done a comparison review. So today, I'm going to compare Sportster 48 bobber style motorcycle. It's the 1200. I'm going to do a direct comparison of that motorcycle and this motorcycle, the Triumph Bobber. Very similar. Well, they're actually both bobbers, no question about that, but very similar in price. Both of them 1200cc, and both of them meant for the same purpose, not long distance cruising, of course, or touring, but bar hopper, you might call it. You might also call it a round town cruiser. No luggage to be carried on these motorcycles. I mean, you could always add that kind of stuff, but this is how they come. And of course, the iconic Sportster hasn't changed much in years, and that's as it should be. And this motorcycle here, the Triumph Bobber, and we know it's a bobber because it says it right here on the tank. I mean, on the side panel, they put that on there in case you thought maybe this was a touring motorcycle. No, this is a bobber. Now I'm going to take them both for a ride and tell you what I think, and we'll do some comparing. All right, first thing you notice upon sitting on the motorcycle is the seat height is quite low. Now I've got a Sportster super low that I use for a training bike. It's not quite that low. They've actually raised the shocks up on these bikes about 1.5 inches or 2 inches, but it's barely noticeable. Also, the seat, you could tell, is rather thin. Feels cushy when you first get on it, but boy, it sinks right down into what feels like the pan. But well, let's face it, these bikes are not built for comfort. Now the seating position on this bike, you are reaching forward for the bars, probably a little bit more than the Triumph Bobber. This bike does have the forward controls, but they're not the type of forward controls that are so far forward that a person, say a person 5'7" or so, can't reach them easily. I know this because, well, I'm 5'7", even though I identify as 6'2". The reach of the bars is, it's lean it forward just a bit. The forward controls seem to be in a good spot. Probably better on longer rides to having your feet a little bit stretched out versus at a 90-degree angle on the Triumph Bobber. Now what is a little strange is these mirrors here being under the bars. A little tough to get used to. You don't see a great deal of the road behind you. I mean, I could see enough of it. It's not like it's a danger or anything. The right side seems to be a little bit worse than the left. Now both motorcycles have the 1200cc motor. This bike puts out about 63 horsepower, but it's torque that you feel. And this does seem to have, it reaches this torque peak, I believe, at 3,000 RPM versus 35 or 3,800 on the Triumph. And you could feel that even though this has a little bit less torque than the Triumph, it's not really noticeable, because the torque is really right off of idle. You could feel the torque. I notice on the Triumph Bobber, you got to slip the clutch a bit more to get going from a stop than you do on this bike. There's a lot more mechanical noise coming from the motor on the Sportster. Some people call that character. Some I'm saying, myself included, this is what a motorcycle should feel like. It's just, if you ride them, get off one and get on the other, that's something that you're going to notice. There's more mechanical sounds. You can barely hear the exhaust on this bike because of that. This has a 27-degree lean angle. I'm not sure what it is on the Bobber, but I'm betting somewhere between 27 and 30 degrees. And when they say 27-degree lean angle, what that means on the right side, the peg is going to fold up a bit, so you can go a bit further, but then you're going to hit the bottom of the muffler. On the left side is a little bit better lean angle before any kind of hard parts start touching the ground. As far as the feel of the motorcycle, they both have wide tires in the front, and the steering is very accurate. The ease of the pushing the handlebars is very easy on both motorcycles. I think the clutch pull is probably takes a little bit more strength on this motorcycle than the Triumph. Both are cable clutches, thank Jesus. Yeah. I know there's a lot of controversy about that, generally from people who only use the clutch to take off and change gears, but if you do any kind of the slow maneuvering that I do at my classes every week, that cable clutch is, for the most part, superior to a hydraulic clutch. So I like that they never put the hydraulic clutches on these bikes. Now all the Harleys have cable clutches, and I don't think it was to save money. According to a rep that I spoke with, is because so many people complained about the friction zone on the hydraulic clutches being like an on and off switch. And it takes some getting used to. I got used to it rather quickly, but I know that some people that have problems using that clutch and throttle, well, they never get used to it. Now, as far as vibration, I feel that there's definitely more vibration getting up to the grips and the foot pegs on this bike than there is on the Triumph. The Triumph is actually it's a parallel twin, and they've been working on that motor for years, just as they have with the Evo motor that this bike has. I mean, they worked the bugs out of this 20 years ago, so nothing to worry about there. But it is a more of a mechanical feel on the Sportster than the Triumph. Where you feel the difference in power versus the Triumph having I think about 10 or 12 more horsepower and a little bit more torque is on as you're going. If you go to accelerate, you could feel the power will sort of fade a bit on this bike as horsepower takes over, and you don't need horsepower. You don't need torque. You need horsepower to keep it revving. I believe these bikes hit their rev limit somewhere around 5,000 to 5,200 RPMs, whereas the Triumph is up around 6,200 RPM, so it makes more its power up higher in the rev range. Now these bikes, this style motorcycle, is what's called a minimalist motorcycle. In other words, everything you need and nothing you don't. You can add all kinds of things to, especially with the Harleys, there's every accessory you can imagine, including 2-up seats and passenger pegs. Neither of them come with a passenger seat or passenger pegs. And as far as the Bobber, yeah, they make a 2-up seat for it, but it's a ton of money because you have to buy a rack and all that it goes on. So if you're thinking that you're going to go do some 2-up riding, this would be for sure the better choice. Now the ride on the Sportster, I think, is initially it's a bit softer ride than on the Triumph. Triumph rides more like the Sportster low, which they no longer make. In other words, a little bit less rear shock travel. Hence the ride is a little firmer. Both bikes, short wheelbase, short rake. 30-degree rake on this bike. So it's probably about equal as far as maneuverability and ease of maneuvering the motorcycle. The longer the wheelbase and the longer the rake, generally the less maneuverable it's going to be at low speeds. The rake and the feeling you get from the rider's seat on the Triumph reminds me more of the Fat Bob, where it almost feels like the front wheel is actually much closer to you, which it is, but it's not so much. But you do notice it. It's probably 2 to 3 inches closer to you. Sort of a dirt bike feel on the Fat Bob and on the Triumph Bobber. Now, price-wise, there's 3 different models of the Sportster. You can go down to the 883, but this bike with ABS, which is an option on this motorcycle, I believe it's about $12,800 MSRP. With that's for the black color. They charge you more for the color, just as they do on the Triumph. Triumph, I believe, is $13,250, but they do make, that's the Bobber Black, the one that I'll be riding today. That's an upscale model of the Bobber, the base Bobber. Like this motorcycle has 1 disc up front. ABS is standard, and it's priced within $200 of the Harley. So, you know, if you're looking at either of the bikes, probably the price is not going to be the thing that changes your mind. Now this bike weighs in at, I believe it's 570 pounds or so, full of gas. Which, speaking of gas, this holds, I think it's 2.1 gallons versus 2.5 on the Triumph. So on either bike, you're gonna be stopping for gas a lot sooner than you would, of course, on, you know, a motorcycle like your average cruiser. It has a 4 or 5 gallon tank. Gas mileage on these bikes are very good. In the 40s for both of them. So you gotta ride both of these motorcycles. If you're in the market for a minimalist motorcycle and you like the Bobber style, the decision that you're gonna have to make, I can't make for you. It's gonna be a matter of which of them, when you look at it, does it say, yeah, I love the looks of that motorcycle? Or ride them and see if you like the more mechanical feel of a Harley-Davidson Sportster, or the more refined feel of the Triumph. As far as riding for any distance, since you're not going to be riding long distances on either motorcycle, or they're not designed for that, vibration or mechanical feel that you get on the Sportster shouldn't really make a difference. In other words, neither one of them are gonna, you know, you're not gonna get worn out riding them, either one, on a 50 or 60 mile ride. As far as seat comfort, yeah, it's a toss-up. Neither one of them are what I would call ultra plush. Shifting on this takes a little bit more pressure on the shifter, a little bit more of a notchy feel, but it is very direct. In other words, you're not going to be missing gears. You know exactly when it's in gear and when it isn't. I'm going to take both bikes down this same road, so it'll be actually direct comparison of both motorcycles on the same roads at the same speeds. First thing I notice on this bike as you get on it, the seat height is about the same, maybe just a little bit lower, a little easier to get your feet to the ground than on the Sportster. But I would think anybody, you know, from 5'2" upwards is going to be able to easily flat foot this motorcycle. Now you've got on this bike the analog speedometer. Tachometer is digital. Not the easiest thing to see as you're riding, but it is there. And it have several different modes. Have a rain mode and a normal. Of course, odometer, 2 trip odometers. Tells you your miles per gallon as you're riding. I'm averaging 47, pretty good. 52 miles till empty. And of course the time. It also tells you what gear you're in. And it shows up even when the clutch is in. You hear the exhaust. It's got a nice throaty exhaust on this bike. You hear that versus on the Harley, you just hear the engine noise, the mechanicals of the engine on that Evo motor rather than the exhaust. Possibly if you were standing behind the motorcycle, it would be different. And this has the mid controls. Both of these bikes have what I consider a wide range gearbox, and I'm saying this based on the touring bikes that I normally have. They seem to be a little bit closer ratio, so where I would be cruising around in 4th gear on the Road King, say, I'd be in 3rd gear on this motorcycle. Seat comfort, this seat is definitely firmer, no question about that. Firmer than the Sportster, but I think it's just a little bit wider. It fits me anyway a little bit better. So for, you know, 50-mile rides, it's going to be just fine. 50, 75 miles. Actually on either bike, just fine for that kind of mileage. But you know, if you're going to do 150 miles or ride until you need gas, yeah, you're going to feel the seat on both bikes. It's not going to be the most comfortable. On this motorcycle, all I really hear is the exhaust. It's a pretty windy day, so I'm not sure how you're hearing it, but I hear the nice throaty sound of the exhaust on this bike, which, by the way, Triumph over the past couple of years has really come a long way. They used to sound like, well, like nothing, like a sewing machine. So I've had a couple of Triumphs in the past. So they did a great job with the exhaust sound on this bike. And you can definitely feel that this bike does have more power, especially as you get up above 2,500, 3,000 RPM, even close to the red line. It still wants to go, whereas, yeah, the Harley's all out of power at about 4,800 to 5,000 RPM. That's just the character of that type of motor. By the way, I've got this bike as a long-term test motorcycle, so I'm going to have it for a minimum of 6 months. And I'm going to let you know as we go along how it is to ride this style of a minimalist motorcycle on a daily basis. I won't be taking any long trips on it. I'll be doing what the bike was designed to do, which is around town hops. Going to the store, etc. Of course, I'm not going to be carrying much from the store on either one of these bikes without adding some type of luggage. Now on the Harley, you could put a sissy bar on it and get one of those sissy bar bags and carry plenty of stuff. I don't think that there's a sissy bar available from Triumph or anybody else for that matter for this motorcycle. They do have saddlebags from Triumph, and I think they run for 2 saddlebags something like $625 plus the mounting hardware, and that's another couple $100, so it's not going to be cheap. Right now I'm using a tank bag I've got here. This is a tank bag fanny pack I got probably 20 years ago from Harley Davidson, and it's held on by magnets, very strong magnets, and it carries enough stuff for around town use as far as I'm concerned. I've also bought another one recently online, not nearly as good, didn't hold nearly as much stuff, and the magnets it came with were pretty much useless. I don't think Harley sells this anymore, this tank bag. I wish they did. I'd have bought a couple more, but it's lasted over 20 years. Now, as far as the ride goes, I believe this bike might be a tad bit firmer riding. I mean, it's nothing that, it's not like a night and day difference, just a slight bit firmer maybe than the Sportster, the 1200. Very close in out and out performance. I'd give this bike the edge in speed. In fact, I would compare it more with the Milwaukee 8107 on the Softail Standard. And there is a weight difference. This is about 50 pounds, I think, less than the Sportster. So you take off some weight, you got more power. So the 78 horsepower that this bike produces at 525 pounds, it's a pretty quick cruiser bobber type motorcycle. A little history on a bobber, and I know that you rely on me because I'm a bit of a historian on motorcycles. The word bobber comes from after the war, World War II. There were plenty of motorcycles, both Harley Davidson and Triumph, and even Indians. And guys bought these motorcycles and they wanted to go faster. The easiest way to go faster was to take off some weight, so they would start taking off fenders or bobbing the fenders. The original guy who did the very first one, his name was Bob Roberts, or as they called him, the Bobber. Okay, I just made that up. But a lot of guys from overseas in England were doing that with any of the war surplus motorcycles, and they were doing it here as well. Some people called it chopping the motorcycle, but that's really when you start changing the geometry of the front end. So it's been kind of going on forever. The bobber style seemed to, as far as manufacturers go, seemed to really come in after the chopper style motorcycles went out. If you remember the chopper craze that lasted for, I don't know, 3-4 years, and all the guys on TV, everybody was a bike builder. They were building, the guys from Orange County choppers were building, so really works of art, unrideable, but they did make a good lawn ornament, in my opinion. You may love that style, but I like motorcycles that you could actually ride. Well, as that phase started to go away, the chopper phase, the bobber phase started coming in, and it's pretty much stayed. So much so that just about every manufacturer, major manufacturer, is making a bobber style motorcycle. That even includes Moto Guzzi. Yes, they've got a bobber. Moto Guzzi here in America, not the most popular bike. I think they're up to 2 bikes a year. I know the Moto Guzzi guys, the 2 guys who bought them are going to be mad at me, but that's the truth. I mean, there's very few of those bikes around, and just try to find a Moto Guzzi dealer. And of course, Harley Davidson has 2 or 3 models that I would consider bobbers. Street Bob, aptly named, without the ER at the end of it. And maybe even the Fat Bob. But of the factory bobbers that stayed really true to the bobber look, I got to give Triumph the edge on that. As far as maneuverability, pretty equal. I think the handlebars turn lock to lock a little bit more on the Sportster than this bike, but I think this has a little bit better lean angle. And while you can get ABS on the Sportster as an option, it comes standard on this bike. Of course, what that means is it didn't come free. They just raised the price so that they could offer it as standard equipment. But it also has traction control, which is on the rear wheel. So if you're getting into a turn too fast and that rear wheel starts to slide out, the combination of the motor computer and the ABS will cut the throttle back regardless of what you do with the throttle and keep you from low siding. It doesn't cure stupid. I mean, you can still low side this bike, but you know, it's a little bit harder. So as far as technology, there's more technology on this motorcycle than the Harley. And again, you got to ride both bikes to see which one you like, which one fits you best, which one makes you take that rearward glance from it as you walk away from the motorcycle. If you never turn your head back and look at your motorcycle when you're walking away, yeah, it's maybe time for a new bike. So I love the style of this motorcycle. As I said, it reminds me so much of the post-war style bobbers. And I'm going to let you know how it is to live with this motorcycle for a long period of time. And I may add a few things to it. Anything I add to it, I have to do at my own expense, of course, but I do have the bike for at least 6 months, they told me. First thing I'm going to add is a little fly screen or a short windshield, because anything above, and maybe I'm spoiled, but anything above 50, 60 miles an hour, you're getting a hell of a wind blast. So if you just take some of the wind off the chest area, and with the full face helmet's no problem, but I'll let you know how that works out. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something about the bobbers. And get out there, road test one if you're in the market. As I said, these are minimalist motorcycles. Just what you need and nothing more. And don't forget to pick up a copy of my Ride Like a Pro video, or Surviving the Mean Streets. Available on DVD, download, or USB. Till next time.